Our topic tonight is a woman of substance, Hannah Penn, Pennsylvania's first female governor. Most of us know a little about Hannah, but we're going to learn a lot more tonight about this woman who was one of the first female governors anywhere, who ran Pennsylvania effectively for some 14 years and was by far the best money manager in the household. Plus, putting that lightly, right? Plus, our speaker promises to share a little known tidbit about William Penn's courtship of Hannah. Our speaker, Doug Miller, has been a museum director since the late 1980s, serving at many well known key spots in Pennsylvania, among them Brandywine Battlefield, Washington's Crossing, and Pennsbury Manor, where he is now. He is also chairman of the board of Visit Bucks County and a peer reviewer in the accreditation program of the American Alliance of Museums. And as some of our members saw last Sunday at Pennsbury Manor, he really knows his way around a dugout canoe. So please welcome Doug Miller.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. I hope you guys will forgive me that I'm going to be using some notes. I haven't given my Hannah talk in a little while, but this year is actually the 300th anniversary of the loss of Hannah Penn. And as a staff, we were brainstorming and we all didn't want to do the Year of the Dead chick. So we wanted to talk about legacy. And man, talk about a formidable legacy. Hannah Penn had it going on. So with that said, I will, first off, your take home, and everyone please help me. I brought copies of the Pennsylvania Heritage magazine that has the Hannah Penn article in it. Some of you that might be at Independence from time to time, there's a volunteer guide there named Bill Kashadis. Bill actually wrote the article about 20 years ago, but it still holds up, and it's a great piece of scholarship. There aren't many good pieces of secondary sources written about Hannah, but William Penn's papers were transposed. At least they cherry-picked some of the best. There's 5 volumes, and there's some of the correspondence to Hannah and from Hannah in those later volumes. Before jumping into Hannah, I do have to do a little bit of groundwork about the guy she ends up hooking up with. So William Penn is born into a wealthy English family. His daddy is a captain in the Royal Navy. Daddy quickly becomes an admiral because daddy's father had bought him a captaincy. Giles Penn is the grandfather. His daddy is William Penn the First. And in a sweeping sea battle off the coast of Ireland, he distinguishes himself. Within the same year, the father meets a beautiful Dutch expatriate, and they have a son. This would be our William Penn at 1644. Our William Penn is afforded the best of things because if you're an admiral now in the Royal Navy and you take an enemy prize, you keep a third, the crew gets a third, and the King of England gets a third. So I had a board member who always used to love to say, oh, it's legalized piracy. And I'd always push back to David. I'd always like, no, you have a letter of marque. And when we took Japanese and German shipping, do you think we gave it back? For as long as there's been battles on the high sea, this is how it's been done. So young William gets to go to Chigwell Elementary School, the premier elementary school there. He has his first vision of God. He also has his first near-death experience. He contracts smallpox. But, you know, daddy's rich, and there's a miracle cure available. It's called mercury. And they give mercury to this 11-year-old boy, which causes early pattern baldness. Something that I can, and I see a few of the other, my co-guides here can sympathize with. And imagine how cool 11-year-old boys can be to you when you're going bald. So from there, he's off to Oxford. Within a year, he gets kicked out of Oxford. Dad gets a letter, your son's a pain in the butt. We want him out of here. And the admiral, scratching his head, what do I do with this kid? Sends him off to Semur, France, where he studies at a Huguenot academy. He'll tour Europe for about 2 years on daddy's money. Gets into a duel in Paris. He writes about this later in life. He's really kind of weirded out by this experience. While a lot of this is unfolding, a civil war breaks out in England. And there's this emerging faith coming along. This 19-year-old kid goes out across England on his own spiritual journey. He has been raised by a Quaker or a Puritan family that got him a great education, but also supported him in his quest. He'll go to different services and so on. His name is George Fox, and he kind of stumbles into this faith. He didn't set out to create a faith, but he starts the Quaker faith. And if you're English, his cohort, we were just talking about, later will be his bride, Margaret Fell, is kind of the co-founder and certainly the organizer of the Quaker faith. This will impact Penn a little bit later. Civil War breaks out in England. That's going on. Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans want stronger Puritan values. Charles I, the king at the time, tells everyone, God made me king, and you people should do what I say. Unfortunately for Charles, he loses the war and his head. While that is underway, Admiral Penn is fighting against enemies of England, not embroiled in the Civil War at home. And Parliament cuts off military spending. Or as I like to say it, the executive branch is not playing nicely with the legislative branch. The admiral, of course, has this great war chest, so he pays to keep the campaigns going, feeds 200 people under his, or 2,000 people under his command, and their wages. That debt will come into our story in a little bit. Well, Oliver Cromwell dies. I really wanted to take Oliver Cromwell's title for myself at Pennsbury because Cromwell was the Lord Protector of England. And I always thought that would look really cool on a business card. I could be Lord Protector of Pennsbury Manor. Well, after Cromwell passes, the populace of England enjoyed having a stronger parliament, but they were aghast that you would behead a king. Prior to losing his head, Charles II was a breeder. Yes, he had 2 sons. They're hiding in plain sight in Brittany, which we would know as France, but at that instant, it was part of England. 11 prominent citizens are asked to go over to Brittany, sit down with the eldest son, Charles II, and say, if we bring you back and make you king, we promise not to cut your head off. And Charles jumps at the opportunity. One of those prominent citizens and the ships that take him is Admiral Sir William Penn. Shortly thereafter, something that happens 5 times in the 17th century, the English and the Dutch go to war. Admiral Penn is a high admiral. He is the best sailor that they have. He sails off with a fleet, defeats the Dutch off the coast of Holland in the Battle of Leuencroft. On board his flagship is the head of the Royal Navy. When he sails back into London, all the accolades, Admiral takes 2 steps back, says, it wasn't about me. The head of the Royal Navy was telling me every move to make. Until people say, why didn't you follow up? You know, you had their fleet crippled. Why didn't you sink them all? Then the admiral steps forward. He says, listen, I had wounded, I had damaged ships. We had to withdraw, protecting the head of the Royal Navy, who happens to be the kid brother of the king. Well, James, kid brother, gets to take over the Dutch holdings in the New World. New Amsterdam gets rebranded because James is as vain as the next guy. He's the Duke of York. Thus, we get New York. And New York extends south until it bumps into these people in Maryland called the Calverts. Skip forward. Penn makes his life conversion to Quakerism within 1 year of actually seeing a battle at Carrickfergus in Ireland. He's written up as being an expert swordsman, and he's actually, after the battle, he's a fop. He likes to dress well. I mean, like myself. And he is at a clothier. That guy happens to be a Quaker. He says, dude, you know, what can I get you? Penn talks about his clothing, but he relates a story about he and his father meeting a very charismatic Quaker orator named Thomas Lowe. This clothier says, you know, Thomas Lowe is speaking about 3 towns over. Penn hops on his horse, goes there within a year, makes his life conversion, which breaks his dad's heart. The father will cane him, throw him out of the house. They'll have a broken relationship. Eventually, the admiral dies. Young William, who's highly educated, a firebrand new Quaker, is able to take some of daddy's money. And one of his first major investments, 2 fellow Quakers are having a dispute over how they might run this colony that is a Quaker enclave called West Jersey. Penn finds out that one of the proprietary interests is available, and Penn buys in the 1670s and actually is credited with writing some of the founding legislation that will eventually become New Jersey. 1671, he meets a beautiful young lady, daughter of two wealthy Quakers, first generation Quakers, Guliama Springett. He courts her, they are wed. The founder of the Quaker faith and his bride signed the wedding certificate. Not long afterwards, Fox and Penn go off. They proselytize in the German speaking countries for almost 2 years, leaving their brides behind. Skip forward, things aren't going great in West Jersey. Quakers being Quakers, they can't all come to consensus. And Penn looks at this Maryland model. I could do better myself. So he petitions the crown. Hey, how about giving me some land instead of paying off the debt that you owed to my father? You know, remember back during the English Civil War, the stuff that he did? And the king says, well, I got to check with my kid brother, James. But ultimately, March 1681, a charter is signed for a new colony. When asked what Penn would like to call the colony, he proudly stands up and says, New Wales. Charles had an advisor from Wales who absolutely hated the Penn family. He's like, dude, don't do it. It's a bad idea. So the king says, I'm not hot on the Wales thing. Give me an alternative. Penn, who was a student of languages in Latin, says Sylvania or Woodlands. Charles II responds, I like it, but my family, the crown, our country, England, owes a debt to your father that we can never fully repay. So we're going to name this colony Pennsylvania in honor of your father, the knighted Sir William Penn. How many of you thought it was named for the Quaker guy? It's actually the great irony of the holy experiment. It's based on a military debt and it's named for a war hero. And I think it's a great example of taking your sword and beating it into a plowshare. Well, I promised to talk a little bit about Hannah, so maybe I better do that. Uh, the same year that William weds his first wife, the Callowhill family brings in a new child. She would be one of 9 children born to Thomas Callowhill. Thomas Callowhill, a decade later, will be one of the first purchasers in Pennsylvania. A first purchaser is buying large tracts of acreage sight unseen. I mean, we are in Philadelphia. We've heard of Callowhill Street, right? Okay, well, it's Thomas. He is a linen merchant and he has done very well for himself. None of Hannah's brothers and sisters will survive to adulthood. And Thomas Callowhill will invest all of his business sense in his young daughter. Now's when I have to get to my notes. And when I started in my career, I didn't need readers. So her birthday is February the 11th. And the town of birth was Bristol, England. Bristol is a booming port city at this point. It's also a hub, not that the Callowhills were involved in any way that I've ever seen, but of the slave trade. And a lot of people, you know, we look at that through an American lens, but it was an English institution that was brought here, among other institutions. There was enslavement with Spanish colonies, there was enslavement in French colonies, there was enslavement between Native American nations. So, you know, a good example of that would be Squanto. Everyone's heard about him. He was enslaved to Massasoit, the king of the Wampanoags, at the point when the Pilgrims land. So enslavement was a human condition, but one that was prevalent in her hometown and one that the founder of the Quaker faith had started to speak out against when Penn was still in elementary school. So Hannah's mother was involved in a lot of the social causes there in Bristol. She worked for relief of the poor, and this was one of the things that was taken on. Another thing that I think was very important is within the Quaker faith, there was an equality, spiritual equality among the sexes. They separated meetings and so on, but they were taking on some of the same challenges. And when, as a historian, you go back into meeting minutes, there's women's meeting and men's meeting minutes and so on. And it's a treasure trove of finding out what was going on in these communities. So William Penn will be coming here while his future second wife is in school. He arrives here in 1682. He got that charter in 1681, but he's got a wife and kids running around at home. He's also got other estates that he has inherited from his father's estate, and he's a courtier. I mean, he knows kings and interacts with kings and so on. One of the estates is Castle Macroom in Ireland. If you want a good example of why the Irish hate on the English, basically take the castle and all of its lands from the Irish landlord, boot him out, and give it to an English admiral. Just one good example of why the Irish aren't hot on the English. So Penn actually asked his advance man to come here, Captain William Markham. He'll play into our story a little bit later. Markham is a seafaring captain. Penn is a linguist. He writes letters of introduction to, we feel, between 800 and 1,200 people that are living in the Delaware drainage that are now going to be English citizens. Some of them started as Swedish citizens, but then when the Swedes are defeated by the Dutch, they become Dutch citizens. And then when the English defeat the Dutch, they become English citizens. So, imagine trying to figure that out. Markham will meet with Lenape people in Morrisville, and he will broker the first land purchase in Penn's name. It'll run from Morrisville inland to the Neshaminy Creek, where there's a Native American village called Playwicky. Follow the Neshaminy down until it intersects with the Delaware. It's about 10 miles of river frontage, and it includes the tract of land that Penn's future home, Pennsbury Manor, will be nestled on. So Penn arrives here in 1682. He has written a draft form of government. On the way over, he actually writes what's called the Great Law, which is a misnomer because there's 82 things he wants people to do, not just one thing. But, this guy's sitting down and he's got a blank slate and he's trying to come up with a way to run the colony. At this point, Hannah has finished her studies and she starts to work with her father in that linen mercantile business. So she's really getting a business sense along the way. Shortly after Penn arrives, he calls on his southern neighbor, the Lord Baltimore, which is the hereditary title of the Calverts, and proudly tells the Lord Baltimore that the southern boundary of Pennsylvania runs right through modern-day Baltimore. And the Lord Baltimore chooses to disagree vehemently. The Calvert claim actually goes up to the 40th parallel. Penn's claim is based on longitudinal lines, 4 longitudinal lines inland from the Delaware. So the southern boundary of Pennsylvania has not been established. I always tease my staff that if William Penn spontaneously combusted, Lord Baltimore wouldn't tinkle on him. There is bad blood between those families for the next couple generations. Well, the Lord Baltimore determines he's going to go and plead his case to the king. Penn's agents inform Penn has to rush back to England to deal with this. Remember whose daddy helped put the king on the throne? So Charles II sides somewhat with Penn and asks Penn to take over the lower counties. The lower counties we would know as Delaware. There are all sorts of intrigues that go on for the next dozen to 15 years in Penn's life. Charles II will pass away. Kid brother James ascends the throne. James is an out-of-the-closet Catholic in Church of England dominated England. And his son-in-law is a firebrand Puritan. William. Mary, the daughter, goes along, and William starts to raise armies to dispose of James. James remembers that his father had his head chopped off under similar circumstances, and he advocates, yeah, it was pretty nice in Brittany when I was there before, so I'm out. So we get the William and Mary period coming in. Penn is accused of treason, which is a capital offense because of trade that he has had through his colony with France, heaven forbid, and because of his friendship with James. There's a belief with William and Mary that he's talking to James's agents. While in the Tower of London, under potentially a death sentence, he's pleading his own case. He's asked to renounce James. And I'll paraphrase, but he basically says, James was my friend at his zenith. He'll be my friend in his desolation. So he will not turn on James. Ultimately, Penn is placed under house arrest, and it's kind of a dark period for historians to figure out what's he actually doing at this time. The colony is taken from him. There is a colonial governor placed in charge who is a military guy. While Pennsylvania was not set up as a Quaker enclave, most of the legislature are Quakers, and they're not really hot on this military guy being in charge. The colony is ultimately restored to Penn. Shortly thereafter, he loses his beloved first wife, Gulielma. He's devastated. They had had many children together, and he's kind of lost. He's also gone through this whole thing of being accused of treason, being jailed, etc. But then he catches the eye of this young lady, half his age. Of course, at 24, the woman's a spinster, but he's twice her age, so he's got to go for it. And he starts to court Hannah Callowhill. This is a fun fact. There are these wonderful letters where he's desperate. I've written to you so many times. Why don't you get back to me? She's blown him off. And ultimately, a third party gets involved in the courtship of those two. What's the street right next to us? Letitia. Letitia's the daughter from the first marriage. She starts to write to her future mother-in-law, who is actually only 6 years older than her. Hey, take a second look at Dad. He's pretty okay. In between those two, they wear down Hannah. And on March 5th, 1696, they're wed. And I always think of the union of William and Hannah Penn as a power couple. Penn was a big picture guy, but the devil's in the details. And he was messing all sorts of stuff up with the details. When Penn gets the colony back, he brings William Markham back as his lieutenant governor. Within 1 month of his wedding, second wedding, he loses his beloved first son, who carries the maiden name of his first wife, Springett. Springett was the eldest son. He had invested all of his training, all of his hopes for taking over in Springett, and Springett dies at age 22. So Penn again is rocked by this high point of finally marrying this woman of substance, Hannah Penn, and then losing his beloved first son. While he's going through all of this stuff, unrest is happening here. England just seemed to love to go to war all the time. And there's potential for war with the French in this colony that belongs to the crown, New York. Other colonies are asked to raise funds for the defense. Penn, raised in a military family, has pledged that this will happen. The Quaker legislature here says, nope, we're not having any of it. And Markham, who's left over here because Penn is back in England with his family, is stuck holding the bag. And he makes concessions and even writes a new constitution that Penn did not approve, and makes Penn give up a lot of his controls in his first frame of government. So things are not working well here. Penn goes to his new bride, listen, I got to go to Pennsylvania. Hannah's like, I'm coming along. And Letitia's like, I'm going with you, Mom. Well, by this point, Hannah is pregnant. It is 1699, and there is a sea voyage over here on the ship, the Canterbury. On board that ship is William Penn's brand new secretary, a guy named James Logan. They're halfway across the Atlantic, and a sail is spotted in the distance. Penn takes the womenfolk, moves them below deck. Logan gets up, mans one of the cannons. Turns out it's an English trade ship. It's not a problem. Afterwards, Penn will dress him down like, dude, you're supposed to be a Quaker. You're not supposed to be on the gun crew. But it will start a relationship not just with Penn and Logan, but with Hannah and Logan that will last their entire lives. So Late fall 1699, the Canterbury makes port in Upland, which today we would know as Chester. Penn, well, he's the rich guy, so he has his own barge. His barge is a single mast sloop that is kept at Pennsbury Manor. It could navigate in the Atlantic and did navigate in the Atlantic. But if you're the rich guy, you have indentured servants and you have enslaved people to bring that barge down to Upland to carry your daughter, your wife, and your future son to Philadelphia, where you're met by the mayor, Shippen, and rent a house from a guy named Carpenter called the Slate Roof House. The unrest where the governmental things were happening were here, not near Penn's home, Pennsbury Manor in Lower Bucks County, and where the physicians were who could care for an expectant mother was here. Thus, they stay at the Slate Roof House. Early 1700, the firstborn of the union of William and Hannah is John, who picks up the nickname John the American because he's the only Penn to be born this side of the Atlantic. While Hannah's caring for him, and they move up to Pennsbury. Hannah adored her stepdaughter, Letitia. They are besties. And Penn's next door neighbor in Bucks County is a guy named Phineas Pemberton. Phineas's daughter, Abigail, moves in with Letitia. Those two young ladies study under Hannah how to be a woman of substance. And the business manager of Pennsbury Manor is not William Penn, it's Hannah Penn. You're dealing with lengths of indentures. You're dealing with enslaved people. You are dealing with an orchard concern of 17 acres. At high harvest, maybe the feeding and the wages of 60 people. So she had a great business sense. The next year, 1701, there's more unrest in Penn's life that, of course, affects Hannah. Parliament is looking at eradicating family-owned colonies. The Calverts are in the crosshairs, so are the Penns. Penn has to go back and plead his case. But more important, there's a creditor that Penn had actually pretty much mortgaged Pennsylvania to, named Philip Ford, who is a subordinate of Penn's. Penn has to go and settle up with this guy. Initially, when Penn was being jailed for treason, he mortgaged Pennsylvania to Ford so that Ford could continue it if anything, if the death sentence was carried out, the Penn family would still benefit from the colony under Ford. Well, Ford had arranged to take land rather than pay, but he's seeing the end of his days coming quickly. He wants a buyout. And he had renegotiated the deal, put the papers in front of Penn. This is Penn's side of the story. And Penn signed off, which gave Ford legal oversight of the colony as well. So it's a mess. Remember, I said the devil was in the details? Penn has created his own poop sandwich. So the Penns have to rush back to England. They get back and, Hannah's pregnant again. Okay, there wasn't TV back then, so there was only so many things to do with your spare time. And there is another son on the way. Philip Ford passes before they settle this. William Penn will have to settle up with Ford's widow. Ultimately, he will be jailed in debtor's prison until wealthy Quakers buy him back out. In the early part of the 1700s, William and Hannah sit down. They discuss, hey, we're hemorrhaging money on this colony. The Penn model was quit rent. What quit rent is you owe taxes in homage to the feudal landlord. It's a medieval term. You guys want a great tax dodge? I'm not sure which colony I'm living in. Am I in Maryland or I'm in Pennsylvania? And if you look at the settlement of Pennsylvania, it's really along the southern tier that most of the settlement is happening. because that's where most of the land purchases from the Native Americans have occurred. The truth of the story, the 40th parallel is about where the Pennsylvania Turnpike is. So Penn pulled off a pretty good land grab there, but it will take 3 generations of dispute before it is settled. So we're getting to the end of the 1710s. Hannah has now had a daughter who has passed, has a second daughter, Margaret, who will survive for almost 50 years, and the family is growing. She is handling more and more of the business pieces, but her beloved father has passed away. Thomas Callowhill has passed. Pursuant to his wishes, Hannah is named the executrix. Normally, it should have been the son-in-law. What I read in between the lines is Thomas Callowhill did not trust that guy with the purse strings. Uh, Hannah and William are facing additional financial pressure because Hannah's beloved Letitia has married let's say, a social climber, a fellow named William Aubrey. Aubrey demands a 2,000 pound sterling dowry, and he will not accept land. He'll take it on credit, but you have to pay 10% interest. Hannah's name for him, Muckworm, which I always like that. I'd like to get that on a t-shirt. But Hannah strongly disliked this guy. She tolerated him because of Letitia. Billy, now the surviving son from the first marriage, we'll say the apple fell far from the tree with this one. He's getting into trouble in London. He is arrested, drunk and disorderly. He abandons his wife and children. The mother-in-law that he dislikes, Hannah, takes them in and cares for them. Well, Penn is desperate. They're going to go work with the estate. Penn has approached Queen Anne. Anne, have I got a deal for you? For the low, low purchase price of 20,000 pounds sterling, you can have a fully developed colony. And of course, Queen Anne says, nah, I already got a couple of royal colonies. In desperation, after a number of years, Penn will drop the purchase price to 12,000 pounds sterling, just a little bit more than the initial amount that his dad had laid out at the time of those battles that he was engaged in. And Queen Anne says, sure, why not? Coming back from Bristol, while they were settling Thomas Callowhill's estate, Penn is seized by stroke. It's like something in a Monty Python thing. And Hannah is left with dealing with the loss of her father. She has an invalid husband. He has bouts of blindness. He has lost his capacity to speak. He will rally over time, but his physicians are saying, keep all the business sense off him. Queen Anne starts to hear from Billy Penn. You can't sign off on this. That's my birthright. And it gets to be such an ugly family mess that Hannah is stuck with that Queen Anne backs out. So now she's stuck with an invalid husband, a dead dad, and a colony that's hemorrhaging money. And she steps into the breach. She writes to James Logan. Logan's response is, I was fed up with your husband and I was about to quit. But for you, my friend, Hannah, I will, soldier on. And Hannah starts to vet every land purchase and make sure that the people who are buying the land are going to make good on the quit rents and so on. She entreats Dickinson, Shippen, Logan, all, oh, I'm just a frail woman, curling her hair. She's a brilliant politician as well. And she builds consensus with these well-placed individuals to back her play. Penn will have a series of other strokes. He'll linger until 1718, never really regaining his ability to govern. A number of the land purchases are signed by Penn. I'm wondering if there was an auto pen back then. I'm not sure, but I'm suspicious. Uh, but these land purchases continue. At Penn's death, Hannah approaches Logan to find out what areas do we actually have title to from the Lenape people. And what they determine is from about where Washington's Crossing is, heading southwest until you hit the Susquehanna, those were lands that some indigenous group had been paid for by Penn. Uh, the development continues. Billy is being a real pain in the butt. There is a will that William Penn wrote when he took on a new bride. Pennsylvania is to go to his widow and the sons of their union. The son from the first marriage is to get Castle Macroom. If Billy had any sense, he would have grabbed that and run with it because Pennsylvania was a mess. But Pennsylvania is in the crosshairs of both Billy and remember William Aubrey, the son-in-law, the muckworm. He's hoping to get his hands in that pot too. Those two will continue to do battle with Hannah until Billy drops dead in 1720. His son, Springett, named for his uncle who had passed away, or the maiden name of his grandmother, basically now contests it. It's tied up in the courts until 1726, when the courts actually hold to Penn's will and say the sons, there were originally four, one has passed away. There's a reason why we don't hear about Dennis. But John, Richard, and Thomas and Hannah inherit the colony of Pennsylvania. Probably the biggest accomplishment, besides starting to straighten out the financial mess that Pennsylvania had become, was an agreement with the Lord Baltimore over the disposition of the people that are in the contested lands. And they both agreed, we're not going to try to tax these people until this is straightened out. It'll be two more generations. The King of England in the 1750s is so fed up with the Calverts and with the Penns that he writes to them and says, I just hired two surveyors here in England. One is named Mason and one's named Dixon, and I'm sending them over. They're going to shoot a line and you people are going to shut up and live with it. And thus we get the Mason-Dixon line. The truth is Pennsylvania made out in that deal because it really should have been Calvert land. I know I covered a lot of ground pretty quickly. I do want to give you guys a chance for questions about some of the stuff that I covered. Okay, so I covered everything perfectly. There will be a test. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. This will allow people that are on Zoom to hear the question. Yeah.
And was up here, Ford would put things in front of him that he would sign because he trusts him to be secretary. And that this was actually that the Ford had put in a thing where he would sign loans because Ford was loaning the money because he said that the states in Florida were losing money and he would loan Penn money and he slipped one in that gave the title the collateral in Pennsylvania. Is that true or not true?
What it was is he slipped one in, changing the disposition of that mortgage. When Penn and Ford agreed on Penn basically mortgaging Pennsylvania to Ford, that was an agreement and a way that Ford could help protect the Penn family should anything happen to Penn. But I think your analogy, it's kind of like Radar O'Reilly and Henry Blake, that, Ford is putting stuff in front of him. And Penn's version is exactly playing out that way, but it wasn't necessarily a chit that Penn didn't see coming. It was how it was going to be disposed of if anything happened. And again, you hear Penn's side of it, like Ford put something in front of me that I didn't know was coming and I didn't agree to. Ford's side is, listen, I lent this guy hard cash to float his debts and so on. And I mean, Penn never really physically worked for money the way, people cut lawns and stuff like that. He was born into aristocracy. So he really didn't learn good money management. And I think that union with Hannah was hugely important. And she starts to dig the Penns out of the financial hole. That financial hole is still there after her passing, and it will lead to the infamous walking purchase, where Penn's sons cheat the Lenape out of a big chunk of their homeland. And for the Lenape, that starts them on what today they call the forced removals. And the descendant tribes, the federally recognized descendant tribes who were forced out of this area, two of them, and they would have been the ones in the Delaware drainage, are currently in Oklahoma. Both of them faced 8 forced removals, where government sets them up, lets them stay for a generation or two. Nope, we're just kidding. You got to move again. Uh, if any of you are interested in some of those stories, there's a Zoom program available at the Schwenkfelder Museum next Wednesday by Jeremy Johnson. He is the cultural educator for the Delaware Tribe of Indians, and I'll guarantee you it's a fabulous presentation. He and I have worked together many times. So, other questions, guys? Uh-huh. So Logan is part of the walking purchase, and Logan will be awarded for his loyalty to the Penns by becoming their personal agent here. He's also highly placed in. And one of the things that I should have gone over was during Penn's final visit here, and he's coming because of that political unrest. The outcome of that political unrest is what's called the Charter of Privileges. It basically sets up rights of jury and trial by jury. This is something that Penn had come into in the Hat trial that he's involved in, or the Penn Mead trial, when he's a brand new Quaker in England. In that trial, he and Mead are found not guilty. The judge basically tells the jury, no, you're wrong, finds the jury in contempt, throws them in jail, and the public outcry is such that that judge has to backpedal really quickly. And it establishes in England, and Penn will carry it on here, that it's the will of the jury, not the will of the judge, that determines the fate of the accused. And he sets that up in his judicial system. And, well, let's face it, about 85, 90 years later, there's a constitutional convention in his city that borrows strongly from that. It also is the first time that you will see the common man being given the right to vote. In English law at that time, to vote for Parliament, you needed to pay a certain amount of taxes to the King of England. And the law, I always love the name of the law because it goes back to the 1400s, the Knights of the Shire Act. Only 3% of the English population could vote for Parliament, even up to the point of the American Revolution. Penn is being highly encouraged by the populace here to change things, but he sets it up that if you're a free man, you don't even have to be a landholder anymore. It's the only colony doing that. And if you guys caught the Ken Burns series, he talks about when the Declaration is happening that Pennsylvania is doing the Constitution for Pennsylvania. And he makes the point that they give the freemen the right to vote. Except that right was already established 75 years prior with Penn's Charter of Privileges that picks up the nickname Charter of Liberties. And while Penn is suffering from gout and Hannah writes to James Logan, it is very clear that Hannah is a partner in the writing of this stuff, that she is actually in there with him looking at the legislative aspect of how the Pennsylvania colony is going to be run. So she is a woman of, equal intellect in my mind and great substance. 50 years after the Charter of Privileges becomes the law, they cast a bell to hang in the State House. It has a crack in it, and most people forget that it's actually cast in honor of William Penn's framing of government. Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Do you hear that? It's working.
Does anyone know the Jeopardy theme? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, good. Yeah. I'm not? Okay. Yeah. Why don't we?
They are working. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with them. Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep, please.
After visiting Pennsbury Manor and seeing like all the work that went into building it and everything, and the decades of, you know, minuscule details, it seems like he didn't. The Penns didn't spend that much time there. Like, can you tell me what's the total amount of time that they were actually living there?
Just under 4 years that they're here in the colonies. And most of his first visit, Pennsbury, he's by himself. He doesn't have Gooley and the kids with him. It's a construction site. So he stays with other people. He rents places, both, and he owns lands in West Jersey as well. So really, for the historic site and the Penns, Pennsbury is habitable during that final visit. That's when the buildings are all completed. That's when the gardens are at their height, that the staffing is at their height. And that's also, for me as a historian, that's when Penn does his most significant governmental work. And I don't want to say his most significant partner, but definitely the partner that people remember, and the one who has had the greatest impact on history, Hannah, is here as well.
But when I was there, somebody in the house actually said that the Penns were only at the manor in the summers. Were they there beyond that?
So after they spend the first winter here because of Hannah's pregnancy and working on those governmental things, the following winter they will be at Pennsbury Manor. And at the end of their final visit, the word spreads to the Native American community, and 200 Lenape sachems and their entourages descend on Pennsbury Manor. And there's a 3-day blowout party that's recorded by a pastor who's there as a powwow. And I always thought that was a 20th century term. And I've asked my friends that are descend from the Lenape, they said, no, it's kind of family reunion, country fair type thing. So Penn gets into foot races with the Lenape during this thing and supposedly wins. And I'm like, okay, the guy was suffering from gout previously, so the Lenape are throwing the race. But they actually pen a letter through a translator to the King of England about their good friend William Penn. And when Hannah loses William, the Lenape ship they say it's a feather robe lined with fur, and it's basically a Lenape matriarch's robe. It'd be fur on the inside, turkey feathers on the outside. The feathers shed water, and it's to comfort her in her mourning. This summer, there's a Lenape artist who has made one. It's on exhibit in Manhattan right now, but it'll be coming to Pennsbury for people to see and for us to connect with Hannah. But I think, to me, that demonstrates the relationship of that generation of Penns. Yep.
You referenced an article that was written 20 years ago that you said still
Yes.
stands up.
Uh-huh.
Can you reference that so I could check it out?
As a matter of fact, for your viewing pleasure, I brought a whole bunch of copies. Pennsylvania Heritage is the Museum Commission's magazine, and I had a whole extra case of these things that have been collecting dust. So I would love for you guys to take them home because I don't want to carry them back to SEPTA with me. I also brought our calendar of events for Pennsbury, We do programming every Sunday starting in April. We do something different. And my fun one that connects to Penn's first wife is at the end of April, we do a brewing demonstration, and we partnered with Aristaeus Brewing. Gully Penn's cookbook is at HSP. And when Springett reaches, or Billy reaches age, the family recipes are written down in this cookbook. It includes a beer recipe. So I actually had a tasting, and it's not bad.
Just help me understand. So
Sure.
Hannah went back to England with William,
Mm-hmm.
and did she ever return to North America?
No, she will run
Okay.
this colony in absentia. And pretty much to the comment we had before, Penn runs his colony in absentia as well. And that's, I think, one of the problems that develops is they're not here. And it can be 3 months for correspondence to make it one way across. So by the time you're actually responding and you give direction on how to address a problem, they've moved on to the next problem. And the Pennsylvania legislature, which was Quaker dominated, and I'm coming from a Quaker site, but it was contentious. One of the things within the faith, and one of the things I admire about the faith today, is it encourages free thought and an equality of your thoughts and your opinions. And at that time, there were people with really strong opinions that frequently did not jive with what Penn wanted to have happen. Other questions, guys? Yeah.
Wait, if you could say a few words. You told me before we started the meeting about the portrait in Harrisburg of Hannah. So if you could talk.
So I know some of you got to go to Harrisburg and see the portrait of Hannah Penn. That portrait was commissioned by Susan Corbett. And some of you, I mean, most of us here have some gray in our hair. You might remember Susan Stitt, who was at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania before going to the National Portrait Gallery. Susan was a huge fan of Hannah Penn, which is interesting for an expatriate Australian. But she introduced Susan Corbett to the idea of Hannah Penn as a woman of substance. And Susan Corbett, she also, I was fortunate that she pointed towards me as well as one of the experts. But Susan Corbett raised private funds because she wanted Hannah Penn to hang in the governor's office. And when you visit the governor's office in our capital, there are portraits of all the governors. And there's a hole there during the time that Hannah Penn was in charge. And Susan's like, we got to fix this. Well, the only life image that's out there of Hannah is not very pleasing. She kind of looks like Yoda. And supposedly it's a life image, but the clothing that she's wearing is somebody that deals with period clothing. It's too late. So we really question whether it was done during her life. Susan Corbett raised private funds, commissioned an artist named Eileen Cooper. And Eileen actually came out to Pennsbury, and the outfit that you see on that portrait, we put on the artist. So she would understand, what does it feel like to wear stays and have a stomacher and have to lace everything up and wear a mantua and all the stuff that a woman of substance would have had. And to know as a portrait artist, how would it drape on the body? How would it hang on the body, and so on? So we work closely with Mrs. Corbett and with Eileen on realizing that the portrait was unveiled in the Capitol. It was hung for one administration in the governor's office, and then it was taken down and moved over to the State Museum directly across the street from the Capitol. You can see that portrait in the State Museum today in the gallery that has a big William Penn statue. But I am hoping that some sense will come into future administrations, and a future governor will see the need to recognize friend Hannah. Other questions? Nope. Up, one back here. Nope.
speak to us about the upcoming event that you're having out at Pennsbury with Lenape folks from Oklahoma?
Sure. Quietly, and something we don't publicize, Pennsbury worked with the descendant communities of the Delaware. These are the federally recognized descendant communities of the Delaware on repatriation. For 150 years, archaeologists have dug up Indian graves. They've taken the funerary goods, but they've also taken the people out of those graves. And those people moved as far west as Berkeley. So for the first time, all 5 descendant communities, 3 that are federally recognized, 2 that are First Peoples of Canada, came together at Pennsbury, and we reinterred some of their ancestors there. But it started Pennsbury interacting with these tribes. And twice a year, I raise funds to bring the Delaware Tribe of Indians to Pennsbury Manor. On Sunday, May the 3rd, we will have a program with them about who were they historically, but also who are they today. One of the things that's very important to them is that people understand they're not a dead tribe. And many times people locally, I mean, how many of you have heard Lenape? Yeah. Ask one of them and they'll say Lenape. And there's a language expert who was adopted into their tribe. He's a Pennsylvania expatriate. He grew up in the Poconos, and 50 years ago, as a graduate student, moved to Oklahoma to study the dying language of the Lenape. The last native-born speaker adopted him. And in Delaware culture, because as they're pushed away from their homeland, people start to refer to them as those people that lived along the Delaware, and that name sticks. Basically, it's not about bloodline or genealogy, it's about community. So in the eyes of the Delaware, he is as Delaware, and he's as white as I am, as anyone else born in the community. But Jim has recovered almost 1,600 words. And if you're interested, the Delaware Tribe of Indians website out of Bartlesville, Oklahoma has a talking dictionary. So if you ever want to integrate some stuff into your tours, and I mean, we're surrounded by, everyone's heard of Shackamaxon, right? The legendary place where Penn meets with him. So I read, 19th century history. It's the place of kings. So I call up Jim. I'm like, Jim, what does Shackamaxon really mean? He goes, it's where we went eel fishing. The place of kings sounds a lot better, doesn't it? But, we've gilded Penn. We've gilded a lot of the stuff and so on. And, of course, they have far more practical naming stuff. Yes. The question was, does Moya Messing in the Lenape language mean pigeon poop? Honestly, I don't know. So I don't want to speak, but you've all heard of the Perkiomen Creek. Perkiomen goes back in their lineage. It is where cranberries come from. Their story of where cranberries come from is warriors were hunting mastodons, and they lose a fight. And where these warriors are stomped into a pulp is where cranberries come up. So my point is, their oral traditions go that far back. When I started at Pennsbury Manor, the archaeologists and anthropologists were telling me the Lenape people were here 3,000 to 5,000 years. And then they reevaluated the science. No, they were here 5,000 to 7,000, then 7,000 to 9,000. We're up to about 15,000 to 20,000 years of human occupation. There is evidence in Pennsylvania and Western PA definitely going back 20,000 years. Radiocarbon dated, no question. And these are foodstuffs. They are things that were lasting. So what we thought we knew is being reevaluated. And I love to tell the story, and you'll hear these stories directly from Delaware tribal members, because there's a hubris with historians and archaeologists and anthropologists that we think just because we have some science or we have some archival background and so on, we know it all. We're not even close. And when I first met this interpreter, we were having a cup of coffee in the visitor center at Pennsbury, and Jeremy says to me, he goes, I hate it when people tell me my history. And I'm like, okay, you do it. So I'd love to have any and all of you that can make it out there. I believe it's in our calendar of events, which we have up here, blatant commercial plug. But also anyone that works at a historic site, I hate it on days when nobody's there to enjoy it, because we preserve these places and we present these places just like you guys guide the tours. to engage people. And for those that did come on Sunday, you'll back me up on this. It's a beautiful site. It's right where the river turns.
So we have like 3 or 2 questions.
Okay,
here, so
yeah,
from
please.
people online. One was, can we go a little bit more into Hannah kind of governing PA, like her style and her management position before that? Because you got to talk about that.
Yeah.
I guess a little bit more detail. And then there's one other one.
So it's pretty sketchy in the Pennsylvania colonial governmental records and references to her because she's doing this stuff in absentia. But essentially, her management style was to build those power brokers that are here, and I named some of them earlier, and get them on her side to basically help convince them. And really, the big unrest, the twofold unrest was rapid expansion. Philadelphia is the most rapidly growing city in this hemisphere at that time period. And it will be the economic center of this hemisphere until outstripped by New York City in 1790. So it's a big deal. And making sure that the people, and her governance was very much focused on what do the Penns get out of it, as well as, what do the people get out of it. But I wasn't going to read from my notes, but I do have to, and I got to give a shout out to the guy that wrote the article. This is a great piece for wrapping things up. This is a direct quote from Hannah Penn at the end of her life. Their comfort is so near interwoven with mine that my children, their whole fortune, my husband's reputation, my own satisfaction, and their happiness hang as a thread together, and therefore shall be carefully preserved by me. She's looking at the people, she's looking at the family, she's looking at, her husband's legacy. I think those are the factors that she's working most on in her governmental work.
Great. And then one last question from Charlie. He said that you mentioned U.S. citizenship for William and Hannah. How did that happen?
So in the 1980s, there was a group of historians and others who decided that William Penn should have honorary citizenship, and they put a push on the Quaker meeting at Jordan's, England, where the Penns are interred, to have them disinterred and moved and interred in Philadelphia. Without asking the Quaker meeting, how did they feel about that? So there's an impolite way of putting it about flatulence in church. It was flatulence in meeting and did not go over well. So the decision was made that they could make the Penns honorary citizens. And there are fewer than 10 honorary citizens who were not U.S. citizens that have been made in the history of the United States. William and Hannah are among them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Can you hang out for a little bit? This has some announcements. So am I still? Did I move this? It's still, the camera's good? All right, so just a couple announcements here, and then if anyone has any announcements, yeah, is this on? Is that it is on? Okay. Before it was much louder. All right, shadowing opportunities begin this weekend. So it's in the newsletter. So you don't have to be a new guide if you're, experienced guide. If you want to just shadow some other guides, I always think it's good to go out and shadow and see other guides at work. You just learn, even if you think they're terrible, you learn what you don't want to do. So it's all useful information. But that begins this weekend. It'll go about mid-March to mid-April for some. Some will go through April. Some are just weekends, so they might go into June. So look at the newsletter and see and sign up. Some are free, some are discounted, but it's a great opportunity. So take advantage of it. We'll do our next History Matters talks. This is where we have people stationed at 5 spots around Independence National Historical Park. And you just tell like little 5 to 7 minute stories to people that come up. It's basically it's underrepresented history. We want to make sure that history stays alive, especially with all that's going on at the president's house. We don't want this history to be erased. So we still need some volunteers. The next one's March 21st. We're trying to do it every third Saturday. That's our intention now. So plan for your third Saturdays. Come out and help us. There's a Google form in the newsletter to fill out because we have to kind of schedule everybody where they're going to be. We have a new members only password. So in the newsletter at the very bottom, if you want to go in the new members section of the website, we have a lot of great resources, especially if you're a new guide, but even if you're not, if you're just want to get some more resources, there's lots on there, but we have a new password for it. So check in the newsletter. Representative Boyle, Brendan Boyle, he just announced some new legislation to help in response to what's going on at the president's house, but basically this legislation to protect American history. So contact your representatives, get them to support it. You know, it's not going to do anything if nobody supports it. So be loud about that. ATTACK, you know, the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, which is sort of spearheading the effort to restore the panels at the president's house. They had a meeting on March 2nd. So if you want to watch it, if you missed it, the recording info is in the last newsletter. They're also selling jackets. So if you want an ATTACK jacket with Avenging the Ancestors, I think they're kind of cool. They're sort of like retro looking. But if you want one of those jackets, they're collecting sort of orders now. And then when they see how many they get, then they can tell you how much it is, right? I guess they're going to try and get like a bulk discount. And if you watched the recording from March 2nd, our own Stephen Pierce is prominently featured. He does a presentation on how to counter misinformation at the president's house. And my Jewel Johnson, who's another one of our members with the Black Journey, he gave a talk on how this initiative is just part of a bigger initiative against tyranny in the country. So check it out. Give them a little love. We still need help with committees. We have our events committee, newsletter, advocacy, mentoring, and outreach. I need people to go to colleges and talk about APT and talk about the benefits of being a tour guide. So if any of you are interested in that, let me know. We set it all up for you. It's pretty easy. We already have a PowerPoint presentation. You just have to go, present it. The exam is Saturday, the certification exam. So if you're planning to take it and you have not told me, you have to tell me today or tomorrow. Well, hopefully I already ordered the exam. So hopefully we have enough. I ordered a few extras, but let me know so that we can make sure we have enough. We don't want you to show up and not have an exam. Next Tuesday is the coffee break at 10 a.m. at the Visitor Center. If you want to hang out and chat with guides over coffee. Book club will be next Tuesday in the evening. We're reading, I don't think Wendy's not here. We're reading Wendy Stanley's book, Power to Deny. So that'll be Tuesday on Zoom. Masonic Temple is March 27th. Oh, the March 19th, there's going to be an NFTGA webinar about the Japan conference, the world conference that just happened. So if you want to hear about what happened in Japan and what that was like, I'll have that in next week's newsletter about that webinar. Masonic Temple trip, the 27th. And then on March 31st, we have this really cool opportunity if you want to develop an app for your tour. It's called eAtlas. And it's not just your ordinary walking tour app. They make them very interactive. So you could, make a scavenger hunt. You can make, you could journal on your phone. How do I feel about this site? I would never do that. But I don't know. I guess young people really like journaling now on their phones. But it sounds really cool. It's free. It's free. The webinar is free to learn about it. And then maybe you'll sign up and you could do a paid one or you can do a free one and she'll explain all of that. But I think it's a great opportunity to check out. You could even do it as like an add-on to your tour. So maybe you're doing your walking tour and you're at the president's house and you want to show some of the panels that weren't restored. You could have an app on your phone where they could pull it up on their phone and they could see, you know what I mean? So you can use it as just like as a tool for your tour or as its own, self-guided tour. So check that out on the 31st. April 10th, with the World Affairs Council, is going to do a cross-cultural diplomacy training for us. It's free, and it's just great. We have a lot of we were going to have a lot of international people coming this year. There will still be some. Those diehard soccer fans are still coming. They're not going to be stopped. So it's free. It's like an hour and a half. It's just a nice credential to put on your resume, and especially if you're a new guide, it just gives you some extra credentials. So it should be good. It's free. April 10th. That'll be in the next newsletter. And then April 14th, we'll have a visit to the Underground Railroad Museum at the Belmont Mansion. So if you have not been there, it's a really great, well, I've never been yet, but the view across the street is great. So we did that. So it'd be really great to do a tour of this museum. They have kind of weird hours and they're not always open. So it's not always easy to get in. So take advantage if you can. And then up on the table here, we have business cards. If you don't have your own business cards, you can take the APT business cards and write your info on the back and hand them out to people if you want. I have some lanyards if anybody needs a lanyard. If you're a new member, does anybody have their lanyard with them to show us? They're like a blue lanyard, so you can wear it when you're on tour. You put your name tag in or your membership card. It's big enough you can stick your cell phone in it if you don't have pockets. But if you're a new member, you get one. Here, Diana has one here. So if you don't have this blue lanyard, we can give you one if you're a member. Just see me after the meeting. And then there's a bunch of freebies, or not freebies, but like discounts there, and some of the info from the job fair. So if you're new and you're looking for work, check out the stuff up there. Those people are looking for work. And that's it. Does anybody want to come up and give an announcement about anything? Ernest, so you can come up and do it. No, don't talk until you're up here so Zoom people can hear you. And then if anybody else has anything, you can come up after Ernest.
I'm not clear about this, but Jane Goldman has something to do with the First Bank. And this Saturday, there is like a free tour inside the First Bank of the United States. I only caught the end of it on KYW when they interviewed her. And the interviews are on, the tour is by registration only, and it's free, on how the mural arts program dug into the the First Bank. Now, APT, we've done tours inside the First Bank. Was it before COVID? But Jane Goldman and the mural arts program has something to do with it, and it is still under construction, but they're giving free tours by registration only this weekend in the First Bank of the United States. I caught that on KYW, but I couldn't catch the whole thing. They interviewed her about that. Also this weekend, I can't remember. Jackie Wiggins is doing Black Women Doctors of Philadelphia. I forgot where it's at though. I think it's at the it's on Cecil B. Moore Avenue. The Cecil B. Moore Avenue Rec Center, I think it is, or I think it's 22nd and Cecil B. Moore Avenue. I'm not really clear about it, but I think it's in our newsletter. If it's not, I better get on her case to let you know. All right. But the thing is, Jane Goldman, First Bank, it's like a personalized tour. You gotta wear a hard hat, all right, because it's still under construction and it's this Saturday. All right, but it's like I said, it's RSVP only. And it's a personalized tour that has to do with the mural arts program and their interference and what they're doing.
Is anyone here in mural arts? Does anyone know what he's talking about? Do you know, Tish, what that is? No? Okay. You have an announcement, Vance? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm with the American Vegan Center. As you may recall, year after year, we do the Best Vegan Cheesesteak in Philly contest, which is open only to people who live or work in the Philadelphia area. So that's not a thing that out-of-towners would necessarily be interested in. But every year there's a big event where we have the final judging of the 3 top finalists with a taste test with celebrity judges, blah, blah, blah. This year, for 2026, as part of that event, we are going to be building the world's largest vegan cheesesteak. So if you happen to have any guests who have come in around that time, this is going to be on April 13th, and I realized I should mention this here because the next meeting will be after April 13th, I'm betting. So Monday, April 13th at the Ethical Society, starting at 6 p.m. We're going to make the world's largest vegan cheesesteak and also select the best vegan cheesesteak in Philly from all the various ones. So I just want to let people know in case you talk to anybody who says, is there anything that's like an only in Philadelphia kind of thing or whatever? Well, yeah, it's on Rittenhouse Square. If you go to Rittenhouse Square, basically the easiest way to find the Ethical Society is go to 18th and Walnut and then go directly diagonally all the way to the other corner of the square, and that's where the Ethical Society is. Thanks. People People need to be within the first 76 tickets. Those 76 people will get a 1-inch slice of this cheesesteak, as well as a sticker that says, "I helped to eat the world's largest vegan cheesesteak." So hopefully there's still going to be enough left over for people. But there will also be additional samples of people's cheesesteaks, vegan cheesesteak.
Anything else? Anybody else have an announcement? No. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks people on Zoom, and thanks again to Doug Miller. Warm applause.